Hello and welcome to another Hand Drink Solo wine info video. And today we are discussing the 2021 vintage of the Strange Kompanjie's UnderWorld Blend number 3. Now this wine is a blend of MOURVEDRE and GRENACHE Noir, which of course fits perfectly into Hand Drink Solo's current exploration into South Africa's climate change cultivars. Now, at my mention of climate change cultivars, you may well be tempted to ask something along the lines of, what even is that? And my answer to your question is quite simple. Essentially, it's a cultivar that can handle low levels of rainfall, increasingly hot temperatures, and still produce delicious wine. Because it's exactly these cultivars that will be quite important in the Cape Winelands over the next couple of decades as rainfall seems to steadily be declining and temperatures seem to be increasing. Thankfully for us, both MOURVEDRE and GRENACHE Noir tick both these boxes with aplomb, if one can indeed tick a box with aplomb. To take a step further and prove our point about how hardy these cultivars are, both the blocks of vines used to make this wine were dryland farmed, which means they receive no additional irrigation whatsoever other than the rain that naturally falls during that vintage. So we know that this wine is a mix of Grenache and MOURVEDRE, but really using terms like Grenache and MOURVEDRE seems to be a little lazy, because what we're doing is using French terms for grapes that are originally Spanish. In doing so, we're burying what I consider to be a far more interesting story. In their native land of Spain, Grenache is called Garnacha and MOURVEDRE is called Monastrell, and these two grapes are really quite different to one another. Grenache, on the one hand, is a thin-skinned grape that delivers quite light-colored wines brimming with red fruit and a little bit of sweet spice. MOURVEDRE, on the other hand, is a vine that produces very small, very thick-skinned black grapes that deliver brooding wine full of intense black fruit and savory, meaty elements. Of course, the blending of these two different components makes for a very exciting end result. When we get into the glass, we're greeted by a rather extroverted vanguard. There's a top layer which is a little moody with cured meat and cinnamon spice and some cedar wood, but then beneath that is a rather lovely mix of red raspberries and deeper blackberry fruit, which is totally what we expected when we discussed the characters of the two grapes. And when we take a sip, that complexity continues from the aromas right onto the palate. Perhaps the biggest departure from the hierarchy of aromas that we experienced on the nose is that on the palate, those moody, salty, savory components that may have been a little more subtle on the nose come right to the fore on the palate. And so you have the blackberry fruit kind of wild and rustic. You've got the slightly more refined, fresh, juicy raspberry. But over and above it all, there's this amazing seam of salinity that just washes over everything. As one becomes more familiar with the work of winemaker JD Roussouw, you'll see that this salinity is a feature that pops up in many of his wines, both white and red. But back to the UnderWorld Blend number 3. The next surprise is the texture. Because given what we know about MOURVEDRE being a big, tannic, moody beast, this wine is surprisingly light-footed and live. So in some senses, the tannic structure of the wine takes a backseat, and front and center is this beautiful, savory element that is woven through this combination of red and black fruit. It's really quite enchanting. In our discussions around climate change cultivars here at the Hand Drink Solo community, we often talk about the issue as though it is far in the future, as if we need to find cultivars now that will serve us in 50 years' time. But the fact of the matter is that the Western Cape is already considered a water-scarce region. The bright side of this is that we don't need to wait 30 years in order to see which cultivars will work. In fact, probably the simplest way of finding out what cultivars will serve us in the future is to look at which cultivars in South Africa have already managed to reach ripe old age in this harsh environment. So, using the Old Vine Project list of published old vine cultivars, I'm going to highlight a few of the grapes that happen to be super hardy and also have the potential to make great wines. These are cultivars that we need to be watching closely. South Africa's most common old vine cultivar is Chenin Blanc. By a country mile, we have over 2,000 hectares of old vine Chenin Blanc. But it's definitely not the only one worth watching. If we scroll down the list to position 4 and 5, we see Pinotage and Cinsault sitting proudly up there. And we're already seeing a growing appreciation for the qualities that old vines can bring to these cultivars. But let's scroll a little further down to positions 12 and 13, where we see Cabernet Sauvignon and Syrah with a fairly large number of old vine blocks around the Cape Winelands. So we can safely say that even as things begin to get a little drier, these two will not be going anywhere anytime soon. It may also interest you to know that just below that, at position number 14, is Tinta Barroca, a Portuguese cultivar that I think is making some smashing single cultivar wines in South Africa right now. Winemakers like Eben Sadi and Adi Badenhorst seem to agree. And then there are a few slightly less familiar cultivars that I still think are very exciting to watch, namely Colombar, Palomino, and Muscat d'Alexandrie. Now, while these grapes are better known for their role in the production of things like brandy or sherry or dessert wines, there is an increasingly fascinating range of table wines being produced by some of our more progressive winemakers. And I'm going to leave a list in the text alongside this video of wines that you should go and track down. Now, that's all we have time for today, but if you enjoyed this video, then subscribe to the Hand Drink Solar YouTube channel, where we publish 6 videos each month talking about unusual cultivars, rising winemaking stars, wine history, cellar science, and some of the really rather crazy things that are unfolding in the South African winelands.